This week on the show, we read a trip report about FreeBSD in China, look at how Unix deals with signals, a stats collector in DragonFlyBSD is introduced, and we have much more from the BSDs in this week's episode of BSD Now. BSD Now, episode 209, Signals, Gotta Catch 'Em All, recorded for the 30th of August, 2017. I am your host, Benedict Reuschling.
And I'm Alan Jude.
And we have yet another great episode prepared for you this week, as always, so we should get right into our headlines this week. Alan, why don't you read the headline at least?
Sure. We have a trip report from the LinuxCon and the China Open Source Promotion Units conference in China.
Yeah, that's why I put on my FreeBSD Foundation hat one more time. So this is a trip report from our executive director, Deb Goodkin. So she traveled to China months ago. It was in May, actually. So the idea was that now that we have added Kylie Liang, which is from Microsoft, to our board of directors, we wanted to promote FreeBSD a little bit more in China and in Asia in general. So she has connections to those conferences and could get Deb to talk there and connect people there with her. So that was a good opportunity to, present FreeBSD in a region where we are normally not that present. So this was the whole trip idea. And this is pretty much the trip report that Deb Goodkin wrote after her experiences in China. So it starts with, in May of 2017, we were invited to give a talk about FreeBSD at COPU, which is China Open Source Promotional Unit, the Open Source China Open Source World Summit, which took place in June 23rd to the 22nd in Beijing, China. And this was a tremendous opportunity to talk about the advantages of FreeBSD to the open source leaders and organizations interested in open source. She was honored to represent the project and foundation and give a presentation, FreeBSD advantages and applications. Since I was already going to be in China, or Beijing in general, LinuxCon China was being held right before the COPU event that they were sponsoring. And there were 6 of us on the panel, including 2 from Microsoft, 1 from the Linux Foundation, 1 from Accenture in China, and 1 from Women Who Code. 2 of us spoke in English, with everyone else speaking Chinese. It was disappointing that we didn't have translators, because I would have loved hearing everyone's answers. They had excellent questions from the audience at the end, she wrote. And she also had a chance to talk with a journalist from Beijing, where she emphasized how contributing to an open source project like FreeBSD is a wonderful way to get experience to boost your resume for a job. The first day of LinuxCon also happened to be FreeBSD Day. So that was a special event that we had in the United States, where we pronounced a certain day to be FreeBSD Day, with some user groups doing special outreach work or install fests. So this was a separate thing there. She had her posters with her and was thrilled to have the honorary chairman of COPU, also known as the father of open source in China, hold one up for a photo op. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to get a copy of that photo for proof. She's still working on that. She spent a long time discussing the strengths of FreeBSD, and he believes there are many applications in China that could benefit from FreeBSD, especially for embedded devices, university research, and open source education. We had more time throughout the week to discuss FreeBSD in even more detail. So since she was at LinuxCon, she had the chance to meet with people from the Linux Foundation, other open source projects, and some of our donors. Yeah, we have some donors in China now, also thanks to Kylie's work there. And also, we're trying to get more companies interested in what FreeBSD is and what the operating system can do for their products or for their services that they're offering. So with LinuxCon changing its name to Open Source Summit, she discussed how important it is to include minority voices like ours to contribute to improving the open source ecosystem. The people she talked to within the Linux Foundation agreed and suggested that we get someone from the project to give a talk at the Open Source Summit in Prague this October. Jim Zemlin, the Linux Foundation Executive Director, suggested having a BSD track at the summits. We did miss the call for proposals for that conference, but we need to get people to consider submitting proposals for the open source summits in 2018. Yeah, so this is on our long-term conference planning calendar so that we don't miss the call for papers and can tell people, hey, why don't you submit a paper for this one? So our trip report continues with, I talked to a CTO from a company that donates to us, and he brought up his belief that FreeBSD is much easier to get started on as a contributor. He talked about the steep path in Linux to get contributions accepted due to having over 10,000 developers and the hierarchy of decision makers from Linus to his main lieutenants to the layers beneath him. It can take 6 months to get your changes in. Wow, that's a long time. On Tuesday, Kylie and Deb met with a representative from Huawei, who've been meeting with them over phone over the past in a few months. So this has been going on a couple of months ago, where we initiated this contact, and there we had the chance to talk to the people in person. Huawei has a FreeBSD contributor and is looking to add more. We were thrilled to hear they decided to donate this year, so there will be a donation coming in one of the future months. If it's not registered yet on the foundation website, this takes a little bit of time, so but we will update the page once we get it. We look forward to helping them get up to speed with FreeBSD and collaborate with the project. Yeah, so thanks Huawei already for this donation to the FreeBSD Foundation. She continues, Wednesday marked the beginning of Kopu and the reason I flew all the way to China. We started the summit with having a group photo of all the speakers. The honorary chairman, Professor Liu, is in the front middle, so there's a picture there, and you can see Deb in the in the front and some of the people who were there. The summit started off with a presentation by the honorary chairman. The key items that he believes are important in China are security and safety, controllable, cloud computing, which is like everyone's topic nowadays, IoT, of course, and teaching students about open source. That particular item, he stressed how they graduate 8 million students every year, and those graduates need jobs. In China, they promote entrepreneurship for young people. There are 7 million companies with 1 to 2 people, and open source is the foundation of many of these startups. He believes the best talent are open source developers. And then there were presentations from big corporations like IBM and Microsoft, and then from many smaller companies, universities, and open source projects. So her presentation was called FreeBSD Advantages and Applications, and a lot of the material came from Foundation Board President George Neville-Neal's presentation, FreeBSD is not a Linux distribution, which is a wonderful introduction to FreeBSD and includes the history of FreeBSD, who uses it and why, and which features stand out, and some of these more compelling features. His presentation went well, and Professor Liu and others engaged through the translators. Afterwards, she was invited to a VIP dinner, which she was thrilled about. And there's a couple more items in the trip report, so I encourage you to read the rest of it as well. So there's definitely activity in China with FreeBSD, and we hope we can continue this effort with more like meetups or conferences like this or other ones. So it's good to have a person there like Kylie or some other developers in China that we can connect with the people there and get them to conferences and generally put them into the FreeBSD community and get their contributions, get the companies to contribute, get the companies to benefit from the contributions everyone makes, and also get their donations as a kind of a benefit of that.
Yep.
Yeah, so check out the full
moving
report.
on, our next story is Unix dealing with signals over on Network World. It's pretty amusing. It says signals on Unix systems are critical to the way processes live and die. This article looks at how they're generated, how they work, and how processes receive or block them. So, they mention Unix and so on, although most of their examples are Linux, but I've helpfully provided the FreeBSD equivalents of them. And what's interesting is how much nicer it is on FreeBSD.
Yeah.
So,
there's this one signal.
yeah, they say on Unix systems, there are several ways to send signals to processes. There's the kill command line tool. There's keyboard sequences like pressing Control-T or Control-C, or you can use a program that will, use the C API to send a signal. Signals are also generated by hardware exceptions, such as segmentation faults or illegal instructions, timers, or child process termination. Although I think child process termination is not generated by the hardware. But anyway. But how do you know what signal a process will react to? After all, what a process is programmed to do and able to ignore is a completely separate issue. So they say, fortunately, the /proc file system makes information about how processes handle signals and which they would block or ignore accessible to command line, like the one shown. In this example, we're looking at information related to the login shell of the current user. So you can see that they grep for the signal block out of this one process, and you can see you get this grid of random numbers, and it's very hard to read. On FreeBSD, however, you can use procstat. So do procstat -i and then the PID, and you'll get similar, you get all the same information, which signals are caught, ignored, or pending, and so on, except in a nice printout format. I guess I didn't prepare a screenshot for that, sorry. But basically it prints out a line for each signal and then showing which ones are pending, which ones are being caught, and which ones are being ignored. And, you know, if it's not being caught, it's being blocked, and if it's not being ignored, then it's not being ignored. And it has a nice man page. So that's all nice. So they say catching a signal requires that the signal handling function exists in the process to handle the given signal. So in the program, you actually say, when we get this signal, this is what we should do. The sig kill and sig stop signals cannot be ignored or caught. Right? The idea is that they override the program and kill it when the program isn't working properly or when you want to pause and resume a program. For example, if you want to tell the kernel that Control C are to be ignored, you would need to include something like that in the source code. So then they show, if we scroll down a little bit here, we can see we set call signal and say for sig interrupt, set it to ignore. Or, for example, on sig seg fault, do the default action. Right, and then they talk a little bit about actually sending signals. So, you know, you could use kill in a process, and that sends the default signal, sig term, or you can do sig dash hup, and that sends the hang up signal, which in the olden days was the signal that process got if you disconnected the modem connection. But it's also, you know, when you log out at SSH or something, and is commonly now been used to rehash an application. So it tells a daemon in the background that it should reload its configuration. And then they mentioned the kill-L. So it's apparently capital L on Linux, but on FreeBSD it's lowercase l. And it lists all the different signals.
Okay. Where is sig info? Where is it?
Yeah, they don't have that on Linux, but it's super helpful on FreeBSD. On Unix systems, signals are used to send all kinds of information to running processes, or, you know, sometimes to request information from them, like siginfo. And they come from user commands, other commands, and the kernel itself. Through /proc or FreeBSD's procstat, information about how processes are handling system and signals is now easily accessible, and just a little manipulation of the data, it's easy to understand. Or without the manipulation in the case of FreeBSD, because procstat makes nice readable output. Including, procstat has libzo support, so you can actually output it in JSON or XML as well. So, let's move on to a slightly meatier story. How about that? Here we go. So this is a blog posty type thing in the bug tracker for SmartOS. Ryan Zazeski, who's a developer over there, posted up this fix for a bug he found where links owned by a non-global zone, which is Illumo speak for like a jail, were erroneously marked as being on loan from the host system. A user reported that in bug number 737 on their GitHub, that non-global zone IP tunnels stopped persisting across reboots. So when you restarted a zone, which is like a jail, the IP tunnel set up inside of it wouldn't start. This behavior first appeared in the February 2nd image and was not there. It worked fine in previous versions. After a bunch of spelunking, Ryan was able to determine that it was caused by a regression introduced in a commit he made to fix a different bug. The regression was a one-line change to the link activate function, which basically said if the link that we're talking about is in a non-global zone or like a jail, then mark it as being on loan from the host. And it turns out that was not what he wanted it to do.
Oops.
So he says, on loan means that the interface actually belongs to the global zone, or the host, as we would call it in FreeBSD, and has been loaned into the non-global zone. So it's not quite equivalent, but it's similar to how regular jails work on FreeBSD, where they borrow an IP address from an interface on the host, versus, say, vimage, where it actually has its own interface inside the jail. It says this regression was easy to introduce because of the subtle nature of the code and the lack of comments surrounding it. So he's going to remove the regression and clarify and add some comments and some assertions so that this doesn't happen again. But he says the following is a detailed analysis of the issue, how he debugged it, and why his one-line change caused the regression. So first, he wanted to verify all of his assumptions. So he started by getting the February 19th snapshot image, booted it, created an IP tunnel inside of a native non-global zone called SOS zone, and it came up, and then he restarted the zone, and when he logged into it, the IP tunnel still existed and had persisted through a reboot like he was hoping. So then he started up the February 2nd image and verified that the IP tunnel didn't start after he restarted the zone. Right, so he rebooted the host OS, and when he started the zone, the IP tunnel was missing.
That's not good.
At this point, I thought I would recreate the IP tunnel and see if I could monitor the zone's halt and boot up processes to find the culprit. But instead, I received an error that the object already existed.
Hey.
So the IP tunnel that didn't get recreated already exists. What? He says, okay, so if the link already exists, why doesn't it show up in either the global zone or the non-global zone? He says, if a link is not marked as active, then it won't show up when you query the DLadmin tool. When booting the zone in the January image, the working one, the link level flags are set to a value of 3, which is active and persistent, right?
Could be, yeah.
Scrolling, yes, active and persistent. So the problem is the link is not marked as active after. So the active bit is missing in the February image. So the IP link structure has the correct flags when link activate returns. So where he made the change previously that was wrong isn't actually causing that part of the problem. But when he inspects the same structure with MDB after, the value has changed. So sometime after link activate completes, some other process changes the flags field. So his next question is, where is link activate called and what comes after it that might affect the flags field? So he did some tracing. So he fires up dtrace and looks at some stuff, looks at the call stack, and sees that after link activate, he has DL management up ID and then DL management handler. So he says the DL management up ID function calls DL management write database entry after link activate, and that can change the flags. But dtrace proved that the flags was still 3, which is active and persistent, after returning for that function. So that's not the problem. He says, with no obvious questions left, I then asked Cscope to show me all the places where LL flags are modified. As I walked through the list, I used dtrace to eliminate candidates one at a time until I reached DL management destroy common. I would not have expected this function to show up during a zone boot because, you're starting up. Why are you destroying something? But sure enough, it's being called somehow and by someone. But who? Since there's no way to track door calls, which is this other subsystem in Illumos, it was at this point I decided to go nuclear and use dtrace stop action to stop the DL management daemon when it calls DL management destroy. Then I used MDB's -k option to inspect the thread and see what was happening. So the culprit is do up IP ton, which caused by the DL admin up the IP tunnel call. Using Petri, I realized that this was happening as part of the zone boot under the network IPtune service startup. At this point, it was a matter of doing a zlogin into the zone and running truss on that process to find the real reason why the destroyed link was being called. So the link is marked as inactive because when it calls getConf to get the configuration for the zone, this bit of code happens. And it says that it fails with eaccess. When you look at the code, it says the caller is in a non-global zone and the persistent configuration belongs in the global zone. So because he marked the interface accidentally or incorrectly as on loan from the host, when he tries to get the configuration for it inside the zone, the OS says, well, no, that's one on loan from the host. You're not allowed to see the configuration. That's the host's configuration. You don't own that interface. It's just on loan to you. You don't get to reconfigure it. But in reality, this interface was created in the zone and belongs to the zone, and the zone should be able to get the configuration. But because of this access denied error, it doesn't mark the interface as active. It deactivates it, and when that happens, it gets deleted, kind of.
Yeah, it's interesting to see the way how the problem got resolved, like trimming it down with dtrace and finding the right line to look at and eliminating more steps in the process. So you narrow down which code paths are the proper ones to look at.
Yep. It says, so what this is saying is that if a link is marked as on loan, meaning it's technically owned and created by the global zone, but assigned to the non-global zone, then the zone calling getConfig is in the non-global zone is an access violation. This code is correct and should in fact be enforced. But why is it tripping in the February version and not the January version? Well, we come back to his earlier observation that he had marked the interface as on loan when he shouldn't have. So he says, as it turns out, while fixing the earlier bug, I fixed what I thought was a bug in link activate, and it turns out it wasn't a bug, it was supposed to be that way. He says, when I first read this code, it was my understanding that anytime we added a link to a zone's data link list by calling zone add data link, that link was considered on loan. My understanding was incorrect. The link activate code has a subtleness that eluded me. There were two cases for link activate. The first is a link is under the non-global zone's data link list, but its link ID doesn't reflect that. The link is found under zone ID 3, but link ID is 0. In this case, the link is owned by the global zone, but is being loaned to the non-global zone, and the link state should be updated accordingly. We get in this situation, when DL management is restarted for some reason, it must resync its in-memory state with the state of the system. Or number 2, the link is not under the non-global zone, and this zone check data link is only concerned with non-global zones. The data link list, the link is not under any non-global zone's data link list, but its zone ID holds the value of a non-global zone. This indicates that the link is owned by a non-global zone, but for whatever reason is not currently on its data link list. like because we are booting the zone and we now need to assign it to that list. So the fix is to revert the one-line change as well as add some clarifying comments and also add some asserts to prevent future confusion in the future. But anyway, I thought this was a nice breakdown of how Ryan accidentally introduced a regression and how he tracked it down and fixed it using dtrace and MDB.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is nice. Yeah, we should have someone talk about MDB because it has a lot more compelling features, and I see people porting it to operating systems other than Illumos.
Yeah,
but that's a whole different topic.
We talked about a little bit the other week that John Baldwin was getting a basic part of it running on FreeBSD. Mm-hmm. But really what this reminded me of is, and we should get Christoph to walk us through the recent errata he had for PF, which had, I wouldn't say a similar issue, but I remember, him hunting it down was a very similar kind of exercise of figuring out what was going on and that the code wasn't exactly working the way you would think it would work. And I thought that would be an interesting segment.
Mm. Yeah, sorry. The necessity for regression test is also not to underestimate, because in this case it would have caught probably some of those errors.
Yeah, but, it's obviously the IP tunnels just would disappear every time you restarted a non-global zone. Mm. But, depending on your setup, sometimes that's not something you do very often. I know for a long time with vImage, the virtual networking system for FreeBSD's jails, there were problems with tearing down. And it was like, well, most people start up the jail and run services in it, and they don't stop the jail until they're rebooting the machine. And so not many people had run into the memory leak, but some people were starting and stopping jails a lot and finding that was an issue.
Yep. Okay.
This week's episode of BSD Now is brought to you by DigitalOcean. Head over to digitalocean.com and sign up and use the coupon code FreeBSD Now, and you'll get an extra $10 deposited into your account. You can use that to start up a droplet running FreeBSD or one of the other OSs that they offer there, and you can use that to do whatever you need to do. For $5 a month, you get 512 megs of memory, which is actually quite a bit with FreeBSD. The CPU, 20 gigs of SSD-backed storage, so it's nice and fast, and a terabyte of data transfer. They have,
that's a lot.
The freshest FreeBSD 11.1 image, with or without ZFS, your choice, depending on how big of a droplet it is or what features you're after. But it's a great way to quickly spin up a FreeBSD machine that's internet accessible and has lots of bandwidth. You can use a gigabit per second if you need it, and you have 1 or 2 or more terabytes of transfer based on what size droplet you get. And, it's a great way to either just play with FreeBSD, especially, hourly. You can rent these machines for less than a penny an hour and try stuff out. And then, if you only need it for a couple of hours, it really doesn't cost anything at all.
Yeah. And if you're running a machine for longer time, then you really appreciate the real-time summary dashboards that they have. So the nice little graph printing that they show you how CPU, memory, and bandwidth are doing. So you get a nice overview of your droplet and what it's doing currently. And you can also install specific applications if you ever wanted to run any kind of like WordPress system, which can be complicated to set up, or other application. They have a couple of them already prepared for you, so you just have to start one of the one-click applications, and then you have it set up the way you want it, and then you put in your specific source into there to get it in the way you want to have it. So check out DigitalOcean and tell them we sent you.
Well, our next story is a bit more detail about that stat collector in Dragonfly. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so this one is on DragonFlyBSD News, and we have information from Matthew Dillon. So he writes, Master now has an in-kernel statistics collector, which is enabled by default, and a still primitive userland program to access it. This recorder samples the state of the machine once every 10 seconds and records it in a large FIFO, all in kernel. The FIFO typically contains 8K entries, or around the last 23 hours worth of data. Statistics recorded include current load, user, sys, and idle CPU usage, swap use, virtual memory fault rate, virtual memory statistics, and counters for syscalls, path lookups, various interrupt types, and so on. A few more useful counters will probably be added, and he'd like to tie CPU count temperature, fork rate and exec rate in as soon as possible or at some point in the future, as well as network and disk traffic. The statistics gathering takes essentially no real overhead and is always on, so any user at the spur of the moment with no prior intent can query the last 23 hours worth of data. Hey, this is nice. This is an interesting idea. So, yeah, it continues with, there's a user frontend to the data called kcollect. It's tied to the build world now. Currently, still primitive. Ultimately, its intention is to integrate with a DBM database for long-term statistical data retention, if desired, using an occasional, like once an hour, cron job to soak up anything new, with plenty of wiggle room due to the amount of time the kernel keeps itself. This is better and less invasive than having a userland statistics gathering script running every few minutes from cron, and has the advantages of giving you a lot of data on the spur at the moment without having to ask for it beforehand. And if you have GNUplot installed, like package install GNUplot, kcollect can generate some useful graphs based on the in-kernel data. Well, it would be boring if the machine isn't doing anything, but yeah, your mileage may vary there. There are options to use GNUplot to generate a plot window in X, or an X JPEG or a PNG file, and other options to set with width and height and such. Yeah, you can totally run crazy with GNUplot and change the whole way the plot will look like. At the moment, the GNUplot output uses a subset of statistics or statistically defined fields to plot, but ultimately the field list is used its uses are specifiable. There's also a couple of sample images generated linked there, so you can see what it looks like. Yeah, this is not an idle system.
Right, this was during a package building run.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, it's definitely an interesting idea. You know, a lot of the stats collection I do right now is running a script on a regular basis and grabbing the current counters and then comparing it to the old one and calculating delta and so on. Whereas if all that data was being collected and I could just grab it, say once an hour, and then dump that data, it would be more efficient. And if it holds about 23 hours of data, then that's kind of interesting. I think with that same size, as they add more counters, the time range will go down. But, you know, if I can dump it once an hour and have nice historic data, but with batch collection, that's actually quite interesting to me.
Yeah, because sometimes you run into situations where, oh, this machine is slow, and I'm not sure how long has been in this state, so you can in this way look back and see, it started like 2 hours ago at that specific point in time, and then you remembered, of course, that's when my long-running cron job is running, or my backup is starting, or whatever.
Yeah, if you're looking at the memory usage, it's likely a lot different if it slowly climbed all the way up or if it spiked up all at once. And so, yeah. And
it could also be interesting for learning. It's like not only collecting CPU time, but all these other metrics could be used in telling students like, see, this is what happens if you send out a lot of packets, so the interrupts increase and all these things that are happening at the same time. Or if you write a lot of data to the disk, it's also consuming a couple of CPU cycles, and the CPU temperature rises, or the disk temperature. So all these things happen not in isolated fashion, but if you only look at a few of these items, then you cannot see the whole system. So this is the more data points you have, the more knowledge you can gain out of that. So it's time for our news roundup this week. We have some news from OpenBSD because Ted Unang's keeping us up with the latest updates on his blog, and he has changes of note number 626 He writes that the hackathon is imminent. Yeah, the OpenBSD folks, well, at this point they had their hackathon, but when you're watching this...
Yeah, of course, when you're watching this, it was like 2 weeks ago. But yes, they had a hackathon in Toronto, and it apparently very successful.
There are two signals one can receive after accessing invalid memory, SIG bus and SIG seg fault. Nobody seems to know what the difference is or should be, although some theories have been unearthed. Make some attempt to be slightly more consistent and predictable in OpenBSD.
It would seem to be useful to figure out which one should come up when, so that when you see one, you know what it means.
Yeah.
So that's definitely interesting bit of work. I see they also introduced Jiffies, which is some kind of time measurement thing that's coming as part of the device driver system in Linux. And so they say, in an effort to appease our penguin oppressors, it's basically they're implemented in FreeBSD as well. It's to support the DRM graphics system. They have this interesting one, clarify that ip.of.upstream.resolver is not actually a hostname of a server you can use and is meant for you to replace it with the IP address of your upstream resolver.
Yep. Insert real address here.
Yep. They switched the ACPI battery command to use _BIX instead of BIF, which means you might actually see a discharge cycle count as well. You might actually learn, how many times your battery's been drained. They've made assorted Clang compatibility fixes. In particular, Clang uses -OZ to optimize for size and -OS to optimize for something else. I think one of them is optimizing for small systems, while the other one is optimizing for small code or something.
Yeah,
but
smaller
it's
binaries.
Different meaning than GCC's original meaning, I think. So they made the GCC in OpenBSD, except OZ, so that all the makefiles can be the same and they don't have to have separate code for GCC and Clang. They also made sure that they always build GCC using GCC, rather than building GCC using Clang.
Oh, they also switched the AMD64 and i386 compiler to Clang, and, well, the message says, see what happens.
They also have a humorous one. The SSL check private key function is a lie. That seems like that could use a little more detail, but...
I sense it's OpenSSL related. Well, just a guess.
Yep, they say, we're moving towards using WSCons, which in the brackets it says WSTPad, which I'm guessing means ThinkPad, but it might be just touchpad, as a driver for touchpads. And then they were doing some stuff with the network locking. They say Clang emits a lot of warnings. They fixed some of them and turned a bunch of the Clang built-ins off, as they prefer to use the code in OpenBSD's libc over the optimized version that's built into Clang. They also made some other changes because Clang, it turns out, is not GCC. Who would have guessed?
Yeah. Oh, another one. Among other curiosities, static variables in the special .openbsd.random data are sometimes assumed to be all zero, leading to Clang Optimizer to eliminate reads of such variables.
Yeah, that kind of defeats the point of having that segment there. So. They also say backsport a bazillion fixes to the stable branch and release errata for them. And they also added some extra pledge rules to SED. And then they say RFC 1885 was obsoleted nearly 20 years ago by RFC 2463, which was obsoleted over 10 years ago by RFC 4443. We are probably not going back.
Yeah, this is funny.
Yep. And they also say that they've fixed VMM to support more than 4 gigabytes of memory in a single guest.
Oh, well, more updates on that one.
And they've disabled the SSE optimizations for i386 and AMD64 for the slow B copy, and saying, it's supposed to be slow on purpose. So optimizing it is the opposite of what they want. They say it's prevents crashes when talking to mapped memory video memory in a hypervisor.
Okay.
Interesting.
Oh, so there's a bunch of stuff in OpenBSD happening. Good to see that there's some intermediate updates of what the actual code changes are. Check them out and see what they get you. I mean, backporting fixes is always good. Okay, our next story is more for the people who are still in the market for a new laptop, maybe. It's called the $25 Freedom Laptop.
Well, I wouldn't say a new laptop, but a laptop.
A laptop in one way or the other. It starts with time to get back to the original intent of this blog, which is functionallyparanoid.com, talking about my paranoid obsession with information security. So break out your tinfoil hats, my friends, because this will be a fun ride. I'm looking for the most open source / freedom respecting portable computing experience I can possibly find, and I'm going to document my work in real time so you will get to experience the ups and possibly the downs of that path through the universe. With that said, let's get rolling. It continues with, that was when he was building his OpenBSD router using the APU2 board. He discovered that there are some AMD 64 systems that use open source BIOS. This one used Core Boot, and after some investigation, he discovered that there was an even more paranoid open source BIOS called Libre Boot out there that started to feel like it might scratch my itch. Oh yeah, there we go. Well, after playing around with some lower powered systems like my APU2 board, my ThinkPad X230 and my Spark 64 boxes, I thought it would run on AMD 64 code and I can run an open source operating system on it. The thing should be powerful enough for me to do most, if not all, of what I need to do. At this point, I started looking for a viable machine. From a performance perspective, it looked like the ThinkPad X200, T400, T500, and W500 were all viable candidates. After paying attention on eBay for a while, I saw something that was either going to be a sweet deal or a throwaway piece of garbage. I found a listing for a ThinkPad T500 that said it didn't come with a power adapter and was 100% untested. From looking at the photos, it seemed like there was nothing that had been molested about it. Obviously, nobody was jumping on something that's risky, so I thought, what the heck, and dropped the bid on the opening price of $49.99. $29.49, sorry. Well, guess what? I won the auction. Now to see what I got. When the laptop showed up, I discovered it was minus its hard drive, but the outside plastic cover was still in place. He plugged in his X230's power adapter and hit the button. I got lights and got dragged into the BIOS screen. To his eternal joy, he discovered that the machine had purchased for $25 was 100% functional and included the T9400 2.54 GHz Core 2 Duo CPU and a 1680 by 1050 display panel. Ooh. Very nice. First things first, I need to get this machine a hard drive and then get the RAM upgraded from the 2 gigabytes that it showed up with to 8 gigabytes. Good news is that these two purchases only totaled $50 for the pair. An aftermarket 9-cell replacement battery was another $20. Throw in a supported Wi-Fi card that doesn't require a non-free blob from Libre Boot at $5.99 off eBay and $5 for a hard drive caddy, and I'm looking at about $65 in additional parts, bringing the total cost of the laptop fully loaded up to just over $100. Not bad at all. So once all of the parts arrived and were installed, now for the fun part, disassembling the entire thing down to the motherboard so that we can reflash the BIOS with Libre Boot. The guide looks particularly challenging for this, but hey, I have a nice set of screwdrivers from iFixit and a remarkable lack of fear when it comes to disassembling things. Should be fun. Well, fun didn't even come close, he writes. I wish I had shot some pictures along the way because at one point I had a heap of parts in one corner of my workbench, the dining room table, and just the bare motherboard minus the CPU sitting in front of me. With the help of a clip and a bunch of whoops wires, patch cables, I connected my BeagleBone Black to the BIOS chip on the bare motherboard and attempted to read the chip. #fail. I figured out after doing some more digging that you need to use the connector on the left side of the BeagleBone if you hold it with the power connector facing away from you. In addition, you should probably read the entire process through instead of stopping at the exciting pinout connector diagram. Because I missed a bit about the 3.3 volt power supply needed to have ground connected to pin 2 of the BIOS chip. Speaking of that infamous 3.3 volt power supply, I managed to bend a paperclip into a U shape and jam it into the connector of an old ATX power supply I had in the closet and source power from that. I felt like MacGyver for that one. Oh, it gets better. I was able to successfully read the original ThinkPad BIOS and then flash the Libre Boot plus grub 2 VESA frame buffer image to the laptop. I gulped loudly and started the reassembly process. Oh. Yeah, other than having some...
I tore apart an X220 to short out some stuff to reset the BIOS. And that took... over an hour to disassemble and much over an hour to reassemble. That's a lot of delicate trying to get all the wires back in the right place and make sure you don't bend anything too far.
Oh, yeah. Otherwise, you have a very extensive doorstop.
Yes. I think it was George broke an X260 recently by jamming it back together too quickly and bent the video cable too much or something.
Too bad. Okay, continuing, other than having some cable routing difficulties because the replacement Wi-Fi card didn't have a 5 gigahertz antenna, it all went back together. Now for the moment of truth. I hit the power button and everything worked. Oh, it's like, it's working. Okay. The racer roars to life, apparently. So at this point, I happily scurried to download the latest snapshot of OpenBSD, current, and install it. Well, things got a little weird here. Looks like I have to use grub to boot this machine now, and grub won't boot an OpenBSD machine with full disk encryption. That was a bit of a bummer for me. I tilted against that windmill for several days and then finally admitted defeat. So now what to do? Install Arch? Well, here's where I think the crazy caught up to me. I decided to be an utter sellout and install Ubuntu GNOME edition 17.04, since that will be the default DE going forward, with full disk encryption. I figured I could have fun playing around for a foreign land and try to harden the heck out of the operating system. I called Ubuntu Grandma's Linux because a friend of mine installed it on his mom's laptop for her, but I figured, what the heck, let's see how the other half live. At this point, when I didn't have what I originally set out to do, build a laptop with Libre Boot and OpenBSD, I did have a nice compromise that is as well hardened as it can possibly be and is very functional in terms of being able to do what I need to do on a day-to-day basis. Do I wish it was more portable? Of course. This thing is like a 6 or 7 pounder. However,
I have a T530. I know how he feels.
And you drag it around with you to conferences.
With a second battery attached.
I tried to lift your backpack at, what was it? Yeah, it was Cambridge and failed miserably. Anyway, however, I feel much more secure in knowing that the vast majority of the code running on this machine is open source and has all the eyes of the community on it, versus something that comes from a vendor that cannot be inspected. His hope is that someone with the talent, unfortunately he lacks those skills, takes an interest in getting FDE working on Libre Boot, on OpenBSD, and I will mostly happily nuke and repave this ancient of days machine to run that. Oh yes, that will be amazing.
Yeah,
because he came so far.
Yeah, Grub has some support for FreeBSD's Geli disk encryption, but I'm wondering if he could do something similar to how FreeBSD did it before the bootstrap and the loader supported Geli, which is having a small unencrypted partition. With OpenBSD, it should only have to contain the RAM disk image. So you would just have a small partition that contained, your bsd.rd or whatever. And Grub would mount that, and once that's up, it can do the OpenBSD soft RAID and be able to boot your fully encrypted disk.
Yep. Yeah, I remember us talking to Sevan about Libre Boot because he made it working on his one of his notebooks. I just want to see how this whole thing looks like and how it works, because it seems like an interesting option for people to use.
Yep.
But yeah, so, if people have experiences...
I'm sure we can find a way to get this poor suffering person back on a BSD instead of a Linux.
Yeah, help him out there.
Yeah, the grub should be at least able to chain load, maybe? So he might be able to actually chain load into the OpenBSD or FreeBSD bootstrap to actually be able to boot off a fully encrypted disk.
Oh yeah, that could be a thing.
Might help. I don't know what they've already tried, so I don't want to make it sound too easy, but it might be possible.
Yep.
This week's episode of BSD Now is brought to you by IX Systems. Head over to ixsystems.com and check out their website. And if you go to ixsystems.com/BSDNow, you can get a shortcut to the ultimate guide to buying a new server for open source. They provide everything you need for your new servers to run whatever open source you want on them. They really are the right experts for buying the hardware. You know, you talk to them and explain what you want to do with the machine, and they know about the hardware and what works where and what's got good open source drivers to build you the right hardware and help you pick the right stuff. You know.
Yeah. Tell them what problem you're trying to solve, and they will tell you which is the best server configuration for that specific problem, and not just one out of many servers that they have on stock like other vendors have. And they also use ZFS very, very consistently and optimized for the hardware that it runs. So they have a piece here on ixsystems.com on their blog about OpenZFS versus BetterFS by Michael Dexter. And yeah, it's an interesting piece and comparison about what these operating systems or these file systems offer as a compelling driver of not only innovation, but also storing data in a certain way and keeping it secure so that you can access it still after millennia if need be.
Yeah, so the article goes on to talk about, you know, how, while we all agree that ZFS is the one true file system you can trust, in the end, we probably want to have options and not only have one file system that works and every other file system doesn't.
Yeah.
And so there's a bit of talk about that. Anyway, it's definitely worth a read. You should go check it out.
Yeah, it's well worth reading and finding what your storage needs are and how that article might fit into your planning of future storage or archival planning. Okay, so next story is FreeBSD programmers report Rison SMT bug that hangs or resets machines.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, it says it started to look like there's an inherent bug in AMD's Zen-based chips that are causing issues on Unix-based operating systems, with both Linux and FreeBSD confirmed to have seen the bug. The bug doesn't just affect Ryzen desktop chips, but also AMD's Enterprise EPYC chips. It seems safe to assume that Threadripper will bundle it in as well. There's a newer stepping that's supposed to maybe have a fix for this. It's not clear exactly what's going on yet. This article doesn't seem to have the link, but somewhere there was a link to AMD's forums where they had a bit more information about it as well. Mm-hmm. I say it's not clear what's causing the issue, but it's related to the CPU being maxed out in operations, thus causing data to get shifted around in memory, ultimately resulting in unstable software. If the bug is exercised in certain ways, it can cause the machine to reset. The revelation about the issue on FreeBSD has been posted to the official repository, where the issue is said to happen when threads, or where threads can lock up and cause the system to become unstable. Getting rid of these issues seems to be as simple as disabling SMT or symmetric multithreading, but this has been would negate the benefits of having so many threads at the ready in the first place. Right? That's like half the point of these newer AMD processors is to have a really high thread count. On the Linux side of the Unix fence, Phoronix reports a similar issue where stressed Zen chips with intensive benchmark can cause one segmentation fault after another. The issue is so profound that the Phoronix test suite developer introduced a special test that can run to act as a bit of a proof of concept. The tests, if you basically set run 4 concurrent tests and loop it 60 times, it usually causes a problem with the machine. And before long, that causes all the seg faults. It's not clear yet if this is something that can be solved with a patch in the kernel for the OS or at the EFI level, or if it's like a BIOS update that'll apply new microcode, or if it's actually a bigger problem. There's been some talk of being able to return these processors for a newer stepping version that doesn't have the bug even, which would be kind of a major setback for AMD.
Oh yeah, that would be severe if they had to recall those, or yeah, it wouldn't be good marketing in all its glory. Okay, yeah, so in another story, we have a TrueOS unstable update for, what is this, till July, I guess? No, August. Okay, yeah, still August, okay. So here are some of the unstable updates for TrueOS, and they released regularly unstable updates on the full rolling release of TrueOS. And unstable includes experimental features, bug fixes, and other current FreeBSD work. If it's meant to be used by those users interested in using the latest TrueOS and FreeBSD developments to help test and improve those projects. And there's a warning attached to it. Unstable updates are released primarily for TrueOS and FreeBSD testing and experimentation purposes. Update and run unstable at your own risk. Yeah, so nothing for production. It's for people who want to help test and fix bugs. Note, there was a CDN issue over the weekend that caused issues for early updaters. Everything appears to be resolved and the update is fully available again. And if you encountered instability or package issued from updating on the 6th or the 5th of August, yeah, roll back to a previous post or environment and run the update again. So now on to the actual changes. In the unstable ISO and IMD images, the files beginning with TrueOS 2017-8.3x64 will be available to download from the usual location, which is download.trueos.org/unstable and then AMD64. And well, the CDN issues have already been mentioned already. So this includes basically new and updated FreeBSD kernel and the world new DRM and which is the direct rendering manager next. Experimental patch for Lib Hive Remote, which is, so this aims to abstract the functionalities from other third-party libraries like libVNC Server, FreeRDP, and Spice to be used in hypervisor implementations. With the basic data structure, it is easy to implement any remote desktop protocol without digging into the protocol specification or third-party libraries. Check some of the examples below. We don't statically link any third-party library. Instead, we use dynamic linker and load only the functionality necessary to launch the service. And our target to abstract functionalities from libVNC Server, FreeRDP, and Spice. Right now, Lib Hive Remote only supports libVNC Server. It is possible to launch a VNC server with different screen resolutions as well as with authentication. And with this patch, we implement support for Beehive to use Lib Hive Remote that basically abstracts some of the functionalities from the libVNC server. So they can enable the wait state, enable authentication, enable different resolutions, and have a better compression as well. They also add a new -s flag for VNC server, and if the Lib Hive Remote library is not present in the system, we fall back to Beehive RFB implementation. So there's an example line here how you would invoke this. And you can see there's a password, not very creative one, but for demonstration purposes that solves it. Yeah, I remember seeing the review on FreeBSD's Fabricator. We had a couple of comments on it, but it seems decent enough to be included. It's still not there, but yeah, people are still discussing it. But hopefully ultimately it will be included so that we can have more flexibility here.
They also mentioned Lumina has a new theming functionality, and that's going to be on by default in the unstable version. A heavily customized version of the Qt5 CT engine is included and enabled. This is intended to allow users to quickly adjust the themes and icon packs without needing to log in and back out. This also fixes a bug in Insight, the file manager, with different icons loading for the side panel and the primary window. Look for more information on this functionality over on the Lumina website.
There's also an update to the Iridium web browser. So Iridium is a Chromium-based browser built on user privacy and security as the primary concern, but still maintaining the speed and usability of Chromium. It is now up to date. Give it a try and let us know what you think, and search for it for Iridium browser in the App Cafe.
And then this one I find a little humorous. They have the early edition of a new translation files for Australian. Did they mean Austrian? I don't think so. It's a pretty big mistake made. And then, so I didn't know Australian English was going to be that different.
Yeah, and usually the Austrians can read German quite well. So I don't know whether it's a typo or an intentional joke or something.
Yeah, it seems like that might have been a joke they slipped in there.
Yeah, so the handbook's also got a couple of updates to reflect the latest changes in the system, of course. And check out the instructions, how to update, and try it out for yourself and report anything that you might find. And remember, it's still unstable, but it's something that might be appearing in a future release version. So if you are interested in what's happening there, definitely give it a show or a go. So, time for our BSD bits this week. So the first item we have is GhostBSD 11.1 Alpha 1 is ready. Oh wow, this is going ahead with full steam. So what's some of the new features include their own software repository. All their software now get updates, and a whisker menu as a default application menu of XFCE. And they also list...
fix some issues with XFCE and mate live sessions during shutdown, suspend, and hibernate. Updated the XF86 video Intel driver, and the mate desktop failing at initial boot has been fixed. Clicking the GhostBSD bugs item in the main menu now doesn't bring up a server not found page anymore. And they fixed the keyboard layout in XFCE and some problems with the ZFS setup.
Mm-hmm. And if there are any GhostBSD developers out there who want to talk about this in an interview, then let us know at feedback@bsdnow.tv.
It's been quite a while since we talked to the GhostBSD people.
Yep. So some updates there would be nice. Okay, moving on. We have a special charm bug announcement. So this is on meetup.com. So this is a casual Southwest meetup with special guests. It's happening in the Colombian Ale House. Mm-hmm. So, special guests Mark Felder and Dan Langell of Cisco Talos will be joining us. They both live out of state. Dan is the founder and main organizer of BSDCan, among other things.
Yes, and the host of the TechSnap podcast that he took over from me when I didn't have time for it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, so if you're in the Maryland area or anywhere in that Southwest area, you should definitely check this out. They're giving you plenty of notice this time. It'll be September 13th. I guess Dan might still be in the area from VBSDCon, I guess is probably why he's able to do that.
That could be the reason. Yeah, it's a good opportunity to meet some of the FreeBSD folks that are doing interesting stuff, not only company-wise, but also like organizing conferences and events. Good stuff. Next up, we have Beehive Obfuscation Part 1 of many. It's over at the Hardened BSD project.
So this is, from my understanding, the idea of this is to make it so that a guest running in Beehive can't tell that it's Beehive that is running in. Mm-hmm. So that it can't tell what type of hypervisor it is that it's running in. Especially, it says, useful when running untrusted code in untrusted virtual machines, like malware. And so this will make it hard for the malware to tell that it's in a virtual machine. And, most malware will try to stop working when it's in a virtual machine in order to make it hard to
it evades then and acts differently. Yeah. Good to know. Yeah. Is that upstreamed or is it Hardened BSD only?
That's Hardened BSD.
Okay. Yeah, so people want to check this out maybe for doing some obfuscation of their virtual machines. Next item is that there's a new BSD Mag out. So head over to bsdmag.org and you can find the newest issue there. They talk about overriding libc functions, FreeBSD desktop with XFCE, Slim, and i3 lock, automating vulnerability scanning with vols. Your information is out there ready for buying, processing data in parallel using multi-threading, and the TrueNAS Unified Storage X10, as well as an interview with David Mitten.
Yes, quite a bit of interesting stuff.
Yeah, check out the magazine if you're interested in some stories, not usually in the mainline FreeBSD press. Yeah, so it's something to check out for. Speaking of checkouts, there is git thing, kernel lower VM underscore max underscore user underscore address to finalize workaround for Rison bug.
So this is in Dragonfly. So they lowered the max user address so they don't use the very top 2 megabytes of the memory space, and that seems to avoid one of the other problems with Rison. So it says the user stack now starts 2 megabytes down from where it did before. Theoretically, we only need to reduce the top by about 4 kilobytes, but doing it by 2 megabytes will be more useful for future page table optimizations. As per AMD, Rison has an issue with the instruction prefetcher crossing from canonical to non-canonical address space. This can only occur at the very top of the user stack. And so by moving that user stack down a bit, you avoid the bug there. In DragonFlyBSD, the signal trampoline resides at the top of the user stack, and in iretq into it can cause a Rison box to lock up and destabilize due to this action. The bug cause was basically 2 CPU threads on the same core, one in a CPU-bound loop of some sort, while the other takes a normal Unix signal, causing the jump into the signal trampoline. The microcode then freezes until the CPU-bound loop terminates, preventing the CPU thread from being able to take any interrupt or inter-processor interrupts whatsoever for the duration, and the CPU may destabilize afterwards as well. They say the prefetcher is somewhat heuristical, so just moving the trampoline down is no guarantee if the top 4K of the user stack is unmapped or mappable. It's better to make the boundary unmapped by userland and move it down further. The bug was first tracked down in early 2017. AMD validated the bug and determined that unmapping the boundary page completely solves the issue. So also retain the code which places the signal trampoline on its own page so it can maintain separate protection settings for, WX or X.
Okay.
Yeah, so interesting to see how easy it is to make a mistake in a processor that's going to be really hard to fix.
Yeah.
But luckily that one's easy to work around and is only changing an address a little bit.
It's interesting that you have ways in software to work around these hardware bugs, but yeah, you can only do so much. Ultimately, the hardware decides what to do.
So here's an interesting one that I saw on Twitter. So in the very beginning of the design of the Go programming language, there was a change made, but it was before they had public code reviews and bug tracker and so on. So this interesting comment only exists inside Google. And so one of the developers has posted it publicly for us to see, saying, very sad to discover that this was not a public code review because they weren't set up for that yet. So he's posted it here for posterity. And you can see back in 2009, this commit from Ken Thompson with just the message, spell it with an E. And you can see he creates an alias for the open flag ocreate, where it's actually spelled with an E instead of ocreat, which apparently is one of his deepest regrets from the original design of Unix, was dropping a couple extra letters here and there.
Yeah.
And then, so yes, and then the person who's tweeting it here, you can see, was doing the code review on it back in 2009.
Ah, this is nice. Yeah, this is Unix history still alive.
Yep. But yes, I'm glad they managed to bring this one up because I found it quite amusing.
Yeah, so before we go into our feedback and questions section, here is something you might want to check out if you're doing backups. And I know you want to have backups in case you need them. But where to put those backups? Well, into the cloud, but not into any cloud. It has to be a secure cloud. The only way to have a paranoid way of securing your backups is Tarsnap, of course, the online backups for the truly paranoid. And the way you do this is the utility that you probably already know how to use, which is tar, because Tarsnap is built on that and uses the same command line switches and syntax. And it's available for the major Linux distribution out there, as well as the BSDs, Mac OS X, and Windows subsystem for Linux as well. So you have no way of evading it if you are on a different operating system. Check out Tarsnap. It's your way of encrypting locally all the files that you want to back up, and then push them up into the Amazon cloud, and no one else can access those files or read them because they're encrypted, and you're the only person holding the keys to the fort, to the data.
Yep. They also have the a link to the announcement email for the Tarsnap GUI. If you haven't checked that out, it's quite interesting. Some notable changes over the previous 0.9 beta. Automatic job backup scheduling, enabling and disabling. Works using launchd services on Mac OS X or cron on all your Unixes. Daily, weekly, and monthly per job backup schedules available. And there's a whole wiki about how the scheduling works if you want to know more. The app has full I-18N support and supports full translations to other languages. Only one extra language is available at the moment. That's the developer's native one, Romanian. If you'd like to offer a translation to your language, please get in touch with us and we'll provide the support and tooling necessary to do that. So yes, let's get the Tarsnap GUI translated.
Yep.
Added the ability to search and filter in the archive and job lists so that, when you have a lot of jobs in archives, you can find the one you're looking for. The archive contents now display the long LS listing format with sortable columns, so that's nice. And you can run concurrent restore operations. So if you need to restore from two different archives at once, if you back up your home directory separate from, say, your source code repository, you might want to have both of those.
Ah, interesting. This one is actually called Tarsnap GUI version 1.0 stable, the chosen one. So people might want to check this out. It seems like they're on a good way of adding some more functionality GUI-wise to Tarsnap, which is already awesome.
Yeah, so head over to tarsnap.com/BSD Now, check it out, and if you end up talking to Colin or somebody over there, make sure you tell them you heard about it here.
Mm-hmm. So, time for our feedback and questions now. The first one is, this is definitely something that Alan should answer. So it's Hans asking a question about ZXFur. He starts with, thanks for the great show. I learned a lot. I recently started playing with ZXFur to back up a VPS to my FreeNAS at home. I set up a new jail on my FreeNAS dedicated for this job, as Alan suggested. And there's a GitHub link there to the README of ZXFur. And on the remote server, I created a user with ZFS permissions on Stent and Snapshot. On the FreeNAS side, Alan proposed to add datasets via this jailed storage manager. He tried that.
I didn't propose that. I didn't write that. But yes, it's on the page.
Yeah, right. You enhanced ZXFur a little bit.
Yes. That part of the README, I think, was written by...
the original author or one of the developers?
Newer than that, because it's about FreeNAS 9.3.
Okay. Yeah, that was some confusion.
Somebody else wrote it, not me.
Yeah, that's okay.
I don't want to take credit for something I didn't do.
Yeah, that's fair, yeah. It only mounts a dataset but does not allow ZFS operations on it as required. He tried setting ZFS jailed equals on the dataset and ZFS jail backup dataset. Then exposed the dataset to ZFS inside the jail, but creating a new dataset by ZXFurs fails with ZShareFS not allowed in non-global zones. He also tried to use...
You can't share stuff over NFS inside a jail.
Yeah, because then it's reserved for the jail only.
With ZXFR, there's an override option so that you can override a particular setting. I think it's just -O even. And so I just set share NFS equals off on the backup side, basically. As ZXFR copies the properties over, it won't copy the share NFS property. It will override it and set it to off. And then the backup will continue and work normally. You can't expose stuff over NFS from inside a jail. It just doesn't work.
Okay. He tried also the ZXFR-I option, but got only error messages knowing unknown parameter -I. So the non-global zone message was caused by the ZFS jailed option, as you mentioned. Also outside of the host system, yeah. So he ended up by using ZXFR-T option to SSH to the FreeNAS host and sudo with a dedicated user. And long story, now the question. Is this a good solution, or would you recommend another approach to expose ZFS inside the jail?
I would leave it jailed like you did with ZFS set jail equals on. You just can't do NFS inside the jail. I'm not sure where you've found this -I option. I've never heard of it. Oh no. Oh, sorry.
Maybe
properties to ignore. That's an incomplete feature. That's not done yet. But instead of -I, if you use -O, share NFS equals off, it will do what you intended.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
The second
part of the problem is that ZXFR was kind of a work in progress that got released to get some of the bug fixes out there, and it's a bit gnarly. Yeah. There's a lot of work that needs to be done on ZXFR, and I've just not had the time. And for a number of reasons, if I had the time, I kind of would want to start over instead of starting with what was already there. But, I'm using what is there as much as everybody else is. And so I'm sensitive to not just making it go away either.
Yeah, so maybe contacting the original author, if that is still an option.
I think the original author is gone, but it's up on GitHub, and I do try to review and accept the pull requests.
And maybe other ZFS replication solutions might be interesting.
Yes,
like the one we
ZRepl
saw.
looked pretty interesting, but yeah, Hans can solve his problem by just adding -O, share NFS equals off, and it'll work fine into the jail like he was trying to do, and it's probably all he was after.
Okay, the second and a little bit shorter question. I use ZFS tools to create snapshots on the VPS. When deleting a snapshot by the cron job while running ZXFR at the same time, ZXFR gives up a snapshot not found message. Well, okay. How does one avoid this? Disable ZFS tools with ZXFR running? Yeah, well...
Yeah, there's two things there. Usually it's not so big of a deal, but if you have a long-running ZXFR, when it goes to like the next data set and one of those snapshots is expired, it dies and has to start over, and it's annoying. I've looked at making it, in the case where that happens, to refresh the lists and deal with it, or also just to remember how long ago it got the list of snapshots and refresh it if it's too old. But I've not got around to writing that code. Yeah. It's hard to say what the best way to do that one is.
Okay. Third question, even shorter one. How to deal with different snapshot schedules on both machines? Is it possible to exclude a dataset and its children when using the -R option?
No, it's not possible to exclude when doing -R. So that's why you generally want to do subtrees. And I think ZFS tools will let you do that. But yeah, it can be complicated. One pro tip I have, though, the prefix, the start of the name of the snapshot, should be unique for each machine. I had a case where it wasn't one time, and creating a snapshot on the source and the destination with the same name, but that weren't actually the same snapshot, causes really confusing error messages.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because you cannot make heads and tails of where
in general, I have a data set called like pool name /m for mirror. And that's where I put data sets that are coming from other machines as a backup. and that one never gets snapshotted on the local system, right? It's just replicating the snapshots from the remote system. And then I snapshot, other data sets recursively, but not that one at the root. I don't know what happens if you do recursive snapshots when a data set is delegated to the jail, if it snapshots it or not. I think it does.
It would be worth trying out.
I'm sorry I don't have better answers for you. The tooling needs to get better, and I've not had time to work on it.
But it seems like he has a couple of already some quite advanced usages. Well, backing up VPS to a FreeNAS at home seems like something...
other than the NFS problem he was having, which he might not have run into if he just didn't use NFS on his VPS, I think the rest of it should just work.
Okay. So thank you, Hans, from Berlin. Greetings to Berlin, by the way, for this question to us. Next up is Harza with a Google Summer of Code question, or at least about this topic. He writes, would it be possible to give some details about this Google Summer of Code project about ZFS boot environment in base I run across at forums? A new ZFS boot environment management library and tool for FreeBSD, or maybe, even better, interview Kyle Neidinger or Alan Jude. Why don't you give us a little bit info about this?
The project is underway. You can see the code for it if you want to look at it already in the SOC SVN repo on FreeBSD. But I'm working on getting Kyle to do an interview. I'm not expecting to have too much difficulty with that. You got to meet Kyle, didn't you, at BSD Cambridge?
Oh yeah, we had we sat together. We went to the computer museum, and he's a nice guy, and he's engaged, and he has the right spirit of being out of the university and starting his first job, and he's a nice guy. So yes, we hope to have him on here soon. The Google Summer of Code stuff is coming to an end in the next couple of weeks, so we'll have the final results of this and all other Google Summer of Code projects. We'll do a rundown of that in a future episode. But yes, we are working on getting Kyle on for an interview. We just need to schedule it. Yeah.
So hopefully soon before he gets busy with his new job.
Yeah. Get it while it's still hot. Okay, yeah. Next up is Tatslot about microphones, proprietary software, and feedback. So he writes, hi, please check Benedict's microphone. I did. I don't know if it's clipping or something else, but sound quality is a bit annoying. If that happens to other people...
I'm curious, what about the sound quality? It seems fine to me, but I'm not an audiophile. So if you have some specific aspect or something that you could tell us what this problem, then we can try to address it.
Yeah, in post-production or next time we record. Okay, you should eat your own dog food. If you advocate BSDs, then screen recording should be done on BSD machines or Linux, but not anything proprietary, please.
I will say that we're BSD people, not freedom fighters or whatever you want to call those GNU people. The show just wouldn't work done on BSD. The bits we could get working would be really low frame rate, and just it'd be more difficult, and it would make it not possible to do it in the amount of time that we have available. So I'm sorry that we do some of the recording on a not BSD machine, but that's what it takes for it to happen.
Yeah, if you know how the sausages are made, then you don't eat those. But is it more interesting?
If you really want to be upset about something, you should be upset that Benedict's laptop is a Mac.
Yeah, guilty as charged.
One of the nice things about the BSD community is that, people don't care.
They're more relaxed about
whatever you want to use. As long as you're doing good work, nobody cares.
Yeah, how it got created. Well, not all the ways, but people are usually more flexible in the way you treat them or how the results get produced. Moving on. He recently listened to some of the first 20 episodes and learned about package source. He doesn't have root access at his work server, which is Red Hat Enterprise Linux 6, but with package source, he can bootstrap Rison compiler and build Tmux and a couple of other software that he lists there. Earlier, I was compiling all these from scratch, so it was a dependency nightmare. Thank you for a great show. Yeah,
yes, so package source is very useful for that type of thing.
Yeah, the ports people are amazing in putting all these things in a nice and easy to use package. They have to deal with the same stuff other people have to do, like the dependency hell or finding the proper ISO or the proper source and make it compile and all these different things that because it's a different architecture sometimes or it's a different software stack. So it's all a lot of effort going into this so that you can just make install or package install and you get the software and use it just the way it's intended to. Yeah, big shout out for ports people or package source people as well. Okay, thanks for the feedback. And our last question is coming from Florian about ZFS and jail. And it begins with, hi guys, do you know any good tutorials on migrating an old UFS-based installation to ZFS or into a jail?
I've done it. I swear that Warren Block has instructions on his website.
Oh, and
but basically what I did was tar with a couple of excludes, so that, skip/dev and so on. And but basically you would run this command so the way I've done it, it required having 2 hard drives. So these were remote servers of mine in Germany, actually, that had 2 hard drives that were a G-mirror of UFS. I took one of the drives out of the mirror, reformatted it to ZFS, and brought up the pool with an alt root. Then basically tarred up the entire UFS file system, piped that into untar to the ZFS file system until all the files were there. And then maybe do a second pass, rsync or whatever. And once they were good, I swapped the GPT boot for GPT ZFS boot and rebooted so that it would boot into ZFS. Once it was running on the OneDrive ZFS, I could destroy the other UFS and add it to the mirror on the Z pool and have both disks. Once it resilvered, I'd have a full ZFS system. So that works if you have 2 drives. Or even 2 partitions on one drive would work. But in place, there's not really a way to do it. But I guess if you have a backup disk, like a USB hard drive or something, you could tar all the files off, reformat ZFS, bring all the files back or something.
Yeah, because the actual... Well, you can get back the binaries because they're pretty much the same on every operating system. The important information you want to get over from the old installation is the configuration files and all that. There might be some user data and all that, but for the basic operating system installation, you could pretty much do a reinstall and just copy the files over for the configuration. It's not an in-place update, but... Yeah.
I've done that too, but... I've done the whole system in place as long as you have, a second. As long as both places can exist at the same time for you to sync them. It's harder to do. It's hard to do in place. Depends how much data you have. You might be able to cheat and temporarily use the swap partition or something, but it's probably not optimal.
Okay. And his bonus question is one on adding boot environments to an existing installation. So this is probably an already existing ZFS installation?
Dan Len-Gill actually has a tutorial when I walked him through it a while back.
Yeah, on the BSD diary or his diaries?
No, it was on dan.lengill.org.
Huh.
It was a while ago, though. See if I can quickly find that.
Yeah, there's a basic description in the ZFS book, one of those. But basically you would replicate, you could have 2 systems side by side like before, and then one has the newer install, and then you pretty much create a couple of data sets. because that's what.
I'm just sorry. I'm quickly looking, seeing if I can find the stuff I did for Dan.
I like people trying to migrate to the latest version of ZFS or the latest features without losing their old install or the old system, which is good, but it's difficult.
November 2015, modifying a ZFS root system to the BAdmin layout.
Okay. We drop a link in the show notes, maybe?
So I'm dropping a link in the show notes to how Dan did that, and hopefully that is helpful to you. It will depend a bit on what your system already looked like. But in general, it's just a matter of renaming what was your previous root dataset, or basically creating the pool / all uppercase root directory, and then renaming the dataset that was your root file system in there, and frobbing some properties, and you will be able to go from there. If there's time, Kyle might add support for that to the new boot tool, the BE tool, the replacement for BEADM, such that you could just do, BE init or something, and it will rejigger your system. I have to look at how old of a release it was before we started laying out by default in boot environment compatible way. I'm pretty sure 10.3 and 11 for sure. So every supported release of FreeBSD that's still out now has supported it. But if you installed off an older one and then upgraded to the newer one, you might need to convert.
Yeah, it doesn't do this automatically.
Right, because there's some danger in it. But it might be possible for the new boot environment tool to do it if there's time before the GSOC project ends.
Yeah. Yeah, snapshot your pool just before trying that, and then you should be fine. Okay, yeah. So this is what we have for feedback and questions this week. And like always, send us questions, comments, show ideas you found, blog posts you find interesting to feedback@bsdnow.tv, and we'll cover it in a future show for all our listeners and watchers out there, viewers.
Yes, and thanks for tuning in, and we look forward to seeing you next week, but also, maybe at a conference sometime.